Good morning. I am not Spencer. If you're visiting, I am not the normal pulpit preacher. I feel like I say that every time I get up, but it's because I want you to realize that it gets better. This is not the end all. It's all right. You just heard the Great Commission read by Spencer, and it's one of those things that we recite and we remember, and it's something we just feel like we just know, and we do it. Yeah, we kind of do it. But this morning and tonight, we're going to do a two-part series on living the Great Commission. Are we living the Great Commission? Because the Great Commission tells us three things. And this morning, we're going to talk about how we see people through the eyes of the Great Commission. But the Great Commission tells us three important things. First of all, it tells us, Jesus says, I have all authority. He says, I've got all the authority. Nothing on heaven or on earth is higher than I am. After his resurrection, he became fully God once again, and he's got all the authority. He says, there's nothing that can defeat me. I've beaten death. But he also says, because of that, because I have all the authority, you are to go to all the world. And it's interesting because when we look at it through that lens, it changes things a little bit. Yeah, he says go, but when we realize that it's because he has the authority, it's a little different. And thirdly, he says, I will be with you. And depending on how old your translation is, it may say, lo, I am with you always. But I hope that he's with Logan and also Spencer and not just lo. But he says, remember, I'm going to be with you always. And so that's all good and fine, and we know that, and we understand that, but do we live that? Do we really live the Great Commission? Because if we're living out the Great Commission, first of all, we believe his authority. We believe that he has authority. We don't just say it and we don't just pretend, but we believe it and we act upon it, that he has the authority. And then we don't just go to the world, we go to all the world. Because in our American society, we have done this donut almost, where I'll evangelize outside of a 100-mile radius of me. And I'll send money to missionaries, and I'll do this, but those people who are close to me, they already know, I hope, because I don't want to talk to anybody. But he says go to all the world. That includes the person you're going to see who's serving you lunch today at whatever restaurant you go to. That includes the people that you may not like. And finally, we make that our personal mission. Because if we really want to live out the Great Commission, it becomes, and we become Christlike, we have to get to the point where we feel and we see people the way Jesus did. Where we feel about and we see people through the same eyes that Jesus did. Because that's what he's really asking us to do. So how do we go about doing that? How do I get from where I'm looking at people through the eyes of an American to looking at people through the eyes of Christ? How do we get there? Well, there's a few things, and the first one, we have to ignore past sins. And you may already be like, oh man, this is getting tough. Well, I'm sorry, but this is the easiest one. These are going to get harder. But we have to ignore past sins, because that's exactly what Jesus did in John chapter 4. You see, Jesus was going through Samaria, which is interesting in itself because a Jew would have never normally gone through Samaria. But he's traveling through Samaria, it's the middle of the day, and he's hungry, and his disciples are hungry. And so he says, y'all go and find some food. I'm going to take a seat down here at this well because I'm tired, we've been walking. So Jesus sits down at this well in the middle of the day, and this woman comes up to him. Well, really not really even up to him. She comes to the well. And she begins to draw water. And Jesus begins this conversation with this woman. And it's interesting because the further into the conversation you go, the more you realize, I don't know if I want to keep finding out more about this lady. And that's how we are about our friends. That's great. You keep your private life to yourself. But Jesus looks at this woman. He looks at her, and he knows what she is. She confesses, I've been married several times and the guy I'm with is not even my husband. But Jesus ignores that. Ignores that, and he doesn't let it blind him to the fact that she needs salvation. Because probably hours before, the night before that he met her, she was living in sin with that man. Hours before. And now she's talking to God. He ignores her sin because she knew there was a right way. And people we see in our lives, they know that there's right. You know, millennial generation and Generation Z, they've been getting a bad rep of they don't care about the truth. That's wrong. We care about the truth. We just want you to prove it, right? Like, don't just tell me that Jesus is the Son of God. Prove it to me. And so people know that there's truth out there, and just like the Samaritan woman, they are hungry for it. People are hungry for the truth. And we have it. People in the world are living in sin. And maybe you are too, but specifically we're talking about going. And so people you interact with every day, they're going to be sinful in nature, just like we are. But when we look at someone, and when we see somebody out on the street, and we see somebody at the mall, do we see their sin? Because I think oftentimes we look at people and we classify them murderer, adulteress, glutton, and not lost, needs help, starving for truth. Do we see people's sin, or do we see their soul? Because when we are able to ignore their sin and look into their soul like Jesus did, we are more easily able to evangelize and bring them to Christ. Second thing we got to do is to remember our own lostness. We got to remember our own lostness, and I'm not saying like in our current state, obviously, but where we were before. Think back to where you were before you came to Christ. Maybe it was as a teen, or maybe it was recently. I remember the night I decided to be baptized and I cried because I wanted to be saved and I couldn't get there quickly enough. And so remember for a moment that time when you knew you were lost and you knew you needed Christ, because that's how a lot of the world is. And in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus sees that. This is kind of the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and he's been going around healing, and he's been going around doing miracles, and he's got this following. And as you read through Matthew 9 towards the end in verses 35 and 36, Jesus comes to this place, and you can almost see that he just stops. And he turns around, and he sees this big crowd following him. This crowd that has been masked because if he is a prophet at the very least, because of these other miracles that he's been doing. We want to follow that. But it's this big crowd, and it doesn't say Jesus looks at them and he's like, oh man, I got to preach. Or oh man, I got to tell them. Or it doesn't have pity. It says Jesus has compassion for them. And I think oftentimes we look at other people and we think we're being compassionate and we're pitying them. This is not oh man, you poor thing, I hope you get it. That's pity. It's a compassion, a hurting for people because they were like a sheep without a shepherd. Jesus had and has compassion for people. Why? Because he understood their state. That was lost. When we go out, do we see lost people or do we just see annoyances? And we'll talk more about how we treat people tonight. But Jesus felt for them. We need to have the same compassion. We need to first understand our own sinful state and nature. Understand that I was lost at one point, just like they are, or just like so-and-so. I was lost too. And do we feel compassion? Or do we just feel annoyed? Or do we feel pity? Because Jesus had this deep underlying compassion for people that I think that sometimes we lose. He had this deep underlying compassion that understood they need me. And the world needs Christ just like we did. Thirdly, we got to put our own needs aside. And again, we're looking at ways we can see the world the way Jesus would have. Because in John chapter 13, Jesus does the unthinkable. You see, Jesus is nearing the end of his ministry. And he's about to institute the Lord's Supper, which we just partook of. But before that, they're all gathered together. His disciples, his apostles, they're all there, and they're having a meal together. And it's kind of awkward, because they're looking around, and there's nobody to clean feet. And in this time period, there would have been somebody to clean feet in every house. It's probably the lowest servant, but there would have been somebody to clean feet. And so they're looking around, and it's almost like a game of chicken. Who is going to wash the feet first? And Jesus stands up. You can almost feel the awkward pause in the room as everybody looks at him like, where's he going? Maybe he needs to go use the restroom. But he walks over to the water basin, and folks, he strips down to his underwear. The Son of God down to his undergarments. And he puts a towel around his waist, picks up the water basin, and washes feet. We live in a very selfish culture, a culture that would never consider lowering ourselves in that way. But Jesus did. He put other people's needs ahead of his own. We are trained to do everything for ourselves, and I'm not saying you shouldn't look out for yourself. You should always take care of yourself financially, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. But don't put other people's needs behind yours, not at other people's expense. Don't hurt somebody else to get there. Are we willing to sacrifice money, time, and even dignity like the Son of God did for others? Because Jesus stripped down to his underwear to serve others. And finally this morning, we never stop looking to help. If we're going to really see people through the way Jesus did, if we're going to look at them through the eyes of Christ, we can't stop looking to help. In Luke chapter 17, Jesus is walking through to Jerusalem, between Galilee and Samaria. And he's coming into this little town that we're not sure which one, but it's probably a little town. It had a priest and it had some things, but he gets there. As he's on the outside of the city, 10 men come up from a distance. And they were not allowed by Jewish law to approach Jesus, so they shout, "Unclean, unclean!" And then they immediately reply also, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And Jesus just shouts back, "Go, show yourself to the priest." And they turn and walk. It's still leprosy. And as they walk, they realize, I'm being healed. And they take off. But Jesus could have just said, "Guys, I'm busy. We're trying to get down to Jerusalem. I got to get going. But, I'm a little busy right now. Maybe I'll be able to swing back around, but we got to get going." He wasn't too busy. And the moral of the story is the one leper came back and thanked Jesus. But I want us to see Jesus here. He wasn't too busy to help. Jesus was constantly looking for people in need. Are we? Ask yourself right now, are you constantly looking for for somebody who needs help? Do we do that? Or are we too busy? Christ-like lives are constantly looking for people to help. And in that spirit, I want to do a little exercise. And this is not to point fingers, but I want to talk a little bit. We do a few things really, really well here at White House Church of Christ. If you're a visitor, you've probably been greeted. And if you haven't yet, you will be. Because I've never been a member of a congregation that greets visitors as well as we do. That is awesome. I've never seen, we swarm visitors. Sometimes I'm like, man, I'm not going to meet them this time. I'll catch them next time because I don't want to drown them just yet. But we do so good at greeting visitors. That is awesome. We also let our members know they're loved. And we're very forgiving as forgiveness is needed. But there's also a few things we need to work on. Besides our own personal needs and other people's needs, the Great Commission is not just putting money in a plate. This is what we've talked about, what was read by Spencer. It's not just signing a check and putting money in a plate. All right, I went to all the world this week. There's more to it than that. It's looking for a chance and taking those chances when they come. Looking for a chance to help. And maybe this morning as you walked in, you saw these cards sitting out. There's a bunch out here, and there's some at every door. So that means you got no excuse. And what these cards are going to do, this is kind of a new thing we're doing, is serving two purposes. The front side up at the top left, it says random act of kindness, just because. And so what I want us to be doing, I want each person to grab 4 or 5 and be looking for people who need help. And when you see somebody who needs help, help them and give them a card. You don't have to give them your name. You don't accept money from them. Just say, I did this just because Jesus would have. And this is not advertising. This is not trying to get our name out there. This is showing people that the White House Church of Christ cares about others. And on the flip side, so it's kind of a dual thing. That's the front side. On the flip side, if you need somebody who says, well, I'd like to visit, but I don't know your times or your address, there you go. We've had cards that do that purpose, but we're adding this. And so again, this is not advertisement, but this is what we talked about a few weeks ago when the budget was presented. We want to be more active in our community, in White House, in Tyler, in our neighborhoods. And I'm telling you, that's tough for me. That's really tough for me. I had 5 of these cards in my pocket yesterday. And I went through Starbucks, and I was like, I'm going to pay for the person behind me. I'm going to do it. And I got to where I paid, and Satan made me forget. I forgot. I just straight forgot. It's difficult. But it has to be something we're doing. The first place I ever worked with that did these cards, one of the members, we don't know who it was, but they had one, and they went through Chick-fil-A drive-thru, and they said, I want to pay for the person behind me, and I want you to give them this card. And so they did. And that person pulled up to the window, and they said, well, I'm going to pay for the person behind me then, give them the card. And it went on through the entire lunch rush. It was on the news that somebody from that Church of Christ had started this movement of love, of helping somebody else. And hopefully it wasn't somebody who ordered a drink and had to pay for 5 meals. That happens, but that's what love is. And there's going to be other things. You know, we're trying to design a t-shirt right now that's going to be a church t-shirt. But again, this is not advertising. I've already talked with a few of you of some ideas. If you have ideas to help with our evangelism tools, then come talk to me. We've got some great ideas that we want to implement that are coming up, but this is the first step. I ordered 1,000 of these cards. I ordered 1,000. I want to challenge you to get rid of them in a month, and not like what Spencer said where he's just going to scoop them into a trash can. That doesn't count. All right? Don't take more than about 5 at a time, and when you come back, grab more. But let's get rid of these cards, and so we have to order more. Because there's 1,000, that'll be 1,000 people who are helped by somebody at the White House Church of Christ. And if we put out 20,000 cards and one person comes in here, it will have been worth it. Because we brought one more person in a closer relationship with God. So there's going to be plenty of things, and our evangelism is only limited by a few things. First of all, it's our imagination. Use these however you want. There's plenty of ways. You know, a mother at the mall trying to juggle her kids, help her out. Hey, just wanted to help you out. And don't give this to them before, give it after. If you're handing them a card while they're juggling a bunch of stuff, they're not going to take it. But your imagination is one of the only limits. The only other limit is our will to search, to use these and to be evangelistic. This is not advertising. This is trying to show people that you care. And there's, like I said, there's some at every door, so there's no excuse to not have some. We have a call, and Spencer read it a little bit ago, that Great Commission. That Great Commission to come to Christ yourself and understand that He has the authority, and then go to all the world. Starting where you're at and branching out from there. Be like Jesus to everyone you see and bring His good news to the world. This morning, this lesson was obviously mostly for current members and current Christians, but if you're not a Christian and you would like to become part of the family, you can do that. And if you're a member and you need prayers because you haven't been evangelizing like the way you should be, and you know you haven't been going to the world, and you want prayers, either one of those cases, if you need anything, there will be elders at the back. I will be up here with Spencer as we stand and as we sing.